Dust hung heavy in the air, turning the late afternoon sun into a fiery haze above the small frontier town. The streets were busy with cowhands, merchants, and a few soldiers passing through, but most eyes turned toward the scene unfolding in the middle of the dusty road. An old Apache woman had stumbled, her frail body crumpling to the ground. Some townsfolk looked on, others muttered beneath their breath, and a few chuckled cruelly at her misfortune. To them, she was just another savage who had wandered too close to the settlement. But to one man, a cowboy with a weathered hat pulled low over his brow, it wasn't something to laugh at. It was something to act upon. He stepped forward, boots crunching against the dirt, and bent down to help her up. His hands were calloused from years of riding, roping, and working cattle, but they were gentle as he lifted her by the arm. The old woman's breathing was shallow, her eyes cloudy with age. Yet when she looked at him, there was a quiet spark, as though she understood his kindness. He offered her water from his canteen. Holding it steady so her trembling hands wouldn't spill it, that was when the laughter started. A group of men leaning against the saloon doors sneered, one of them spitting into the dirt. "Look at that fool," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Helping an Apache like she's some fine lady." Another joined in. "Don't he know better? She's probably cursed. Next thing you know, he'll be scalped in his sleep." The jeers carried across the street, and soon a crowd had gathered, not to help, but to watch the humiliation. The cowboy ignored them. He kept his focus on the old woman, steadying her as she struggled to rise. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. To speak would only feed their mockery, and he knew the West was a place where silence often said more than words. Still, the sting of their scorn cut deep. Every chuckle, every cruel word pressed against his pride like a branding iron. Then, from the shadows of the nearby trading post, another figure appeared. She was tall, her back straight, her eyes sharp as an eagle's, beads and feathers decorated her braids, and a leather dress with hand-stitched patterns spoke of her people's traditions. She stepped forward with a grace that silenced even the loudest drunkard among the crowd. The young woman's gaze swept over the onlookers, then landed on the cowboy who still held her mother steady. Whispers rippled through the townsfolk. Some lowered their voices, others simply stared, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. The young Apache woman ignored them all. She walked toward the cowboy and the old woman with a calm authority that seemed to carry the weight of generations. Without saying a word, she took her mother's other arm and stood beside the cowboy. For a moment, the two of them shared a silent understanding, two strangers from different worlds, united by a single act of compassion. The townsfolk didn't see it that way. "Would you look at that?" one of the men drawled. "Cowboy thinks he's found himself an Indian bride." Laughter erupted again, uglier this time, louder. The cowboy's fists clenched, but he kept his eyes low, refusing to give them the fight they wanted. The old woman finally found her breath and spoke in a faint but steady voice. Though her words were foreign to most ears, the daughter translated, "My mother says you are a man of honor. Where others turned their backs, you reached out your hand." She paused, her dark eyes locking onto his. "She says a man like you should not walk alone." The cowboy blinked, caught off guard. He had expected perhaps a quiet thank you, nothing more. Instead, the old woman lifted her trembling hand and motioned toward her daughter. The crowd, though they couldn't understand the words, understood the gesture. A hush fell over the street. The daughter straightened, her expression unreadable, though there was a flicker of something respect. Perhaps her curiosity in her eyes as she looked at him. She stood proud, the late sun catching the beads on her dress, making them shimmer like fireflies. The cowboy's throat tightened. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't expected it. All he'd wanted was to help. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of a hostile town. With every eye fixed on him, and the weight of a choice settling heavy on his shoulders, the mocking voices had quieted. But the silence that replaced them was sharper, heavier. It wasn't just about helping an old woman anymore. It was about what came next. Would he accept the gift being offered? Would he stand against the sneers and whispers of the town? Or would he step back, walk away, and let the moment slip into dust like so many others before it? The Cowboy swallowed hard, his heart thudding in his chest. He could feel the tension in the air, thick as a coiled rattlesnake ready to strike. Every second stretched longer than the last. Every breath heavier than the one before. And then the old woman spoke again, her voice stronger this time, carrying across the silent street. Her daughter's lips pressed into a firm line as she prepared to translate. The cowboy braced himself, every nerve alive. As the words began to form, what she said next would change everything. The old woman's voice rose with a quiet strength, surprising even her daughter. Though her words were spoken in her native tongue, the meaning seemed to cut through the silence like a blade. The young woman translated, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed the weight of what was being said. My mother says a man who shows kindness when others show cruelty is a man chosen by fate. She says you are not only a helper today, you may be meant for more. The cowboy felt every eye upon him. The crowd shifted uneasily, some smirking again, others frowning, uncertain what to make of the old woman's words. He could feel their judgment, the way their stares pressed against his back like the noonday sun. Yet what struck him most was not the townsfolk's mockery, it was the daughter's gaze. Her eyes held his, calm but piercing, as if she was trying to see past his dusty hat and weathered boots. Deep into the man beneath, he cleared his throat, unsure what to say. He hadn't asked for this burden. He hadn't set out to be anyone's savior or chosen man. All he had wanted was to help someone in need, something his upbringing had taught him was right, no matter who the person was. Yet here he stood, caught in a storm bigger than he'd expected. And every step forward felt like it could change the course of his life. The crowd wasn't ready to let the moment pass quietly. One man, red-faced from whiskey, shouted, "Don't listen to her, cowboy. They'll drag you back to their camp and string you up. Ain't nothing good comes from siding with Apaches." His words drew a few nervous chuckles, but the sound lacked the strength it had before. Something about the sight of the daughter standing tall beside her mother seemed to make the insults falter. The cowboy helped the old woman to the edge of the street, where she could sit on a bench outside the trading post. The daughter followed, her every movement watched closely by the crowd. Dust swirled around their boots as the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of leather, smoke, and horses. The cowboy felt the tension twist tighter inside him. He wanted to turn away, to retreat back to the quiet life he had carved out for himself in the canyons beyond town. But he also knew some moments couldn't be walked away from. The daughter knelt beside her mother, whispering softly in their own language. The old woman answered with a nod, her voice faint but clear enough to carry fragments of meaning. The daughter rose again, this time standing directly before the cowboy. She looked into his eyes, unflinching. "My mother says," she began slowly, "that in times of weakness, true character is shown. You did not hesitate to help," she says. "She would see you as family." Family. The word struck him harder than the taunts of the men in the street. Family was something he hadn't known in years. His own kin had scattered long ago, his father buried under the Texas sun, his brothers gone to wars or wandering far-off trails, his mother's memory little more than a fading warmth. The open plains and his horse had been his only companions. To hear the words spoken now, by strangers, carried more weight than he was ready to bear. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but none came. His silence only deepened the mystery, making the onlookers restless. Some muttered about witchcraft, others about foolishness. Yet the cowboy felt something stir inside him, something he couldn't quite name. The daughter tilted her head slightly, as though testing him. "She says a man cannot ride to trails at once. You must choose. Choose." The word clung to him like dust. He didn't know what choice she meant. Was it about siding with them over the townsfolk? Was it about stepping into a role he hadn't asked for? Or was it something even greater, something that could tie his fate to theirs in ways he could not yet see? Before he could answer, the old woman coughed, her frail body shaking with the effort. The daughter rushed back to her side, offering her water from the cowboy's canteen. The old woman drank slowly, then closed her eyes as if gathering strength. The cowboy could see the deep lines of age carved into her face, each one telling a story of hardship and survival. Yet her expression, even in weakness, carried dignity. The townsfolk began to disperse. though not without throwing suspicious glances over their shoulders. Their laughter had faded, replaced by something else, ease. They had come to mock a cowboy and an old Apache. But instead they had witnessed something they didn't understand, something that made them restless in their boots. By the time the last of them slipped back into the saloon or the mercantile, the street had grown quiet again, save for the whisper of the wind. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly, unsure whether to stay or ride off. But as he turned toward his horse, the daughter's voice stopped him. She says, "You cannot walk away yet. You have stirred the dust, and now the wind will not let it settle." He froze, the words striking deep. He wanted to ask what she meant, but her eyes told him she would not explain more here, not with ears that might still be listening from behind half-open doors. Instead, she motioned for him to follow. Reluctantly, he did. Together they led the old woman slowly down the road, past the general store and the blacksmith's forge, toward the quieter edge of town where the land stretched open and wild. The cowboy walked a step behind, his mind heavy with questions. Who was this woman? Really? Why did her daughter speak with such certainty, as though she knew more than she revealed? And what fate was he being drawn into by a single act of kindness? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the town. The cowboy felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, like the calm before a storm. He had no answers, only the gnawing sense that his life had just shifted onto a new trail. One he hadn't chosen, but one he couldn't seem to step away from. As they neared the edge of town, the old woman whispered again, her voice fragile but insistent. The daughter turned, her expression unreadable, and said, "She says you will soon see why you were meant to be here today." The cowboy's chest tightened. The horizon stretched wide before him, endless and uncertain, the kind of horizon that could swallow a man whole. He had walked this land long enough to know that every choice had a cost. And now, standing beside two strangers who carried with them secrets he couldn't yet grasp, he felt the cost looming just ahead. The daughter glanced back at him once more, her eyes holding his for a long, unbroken moment. "Do not fear the road, cowboy," she said softly. "Fear only what happens if you turn away from it." Her words lingered in the evening air, sharp as an arrow, heavy as a promise. The cowboy gripped the brim of his hat, heart pounding. As the first stars began to break through the darkening sky, he had no idea what waited for him beyond that stretch of open land. But one thing was clear, he could not turn back now. Not after this. The night came down heavy over the small frontier town, the kind of night where the wind carried whispers and every shadow looked alive. The cowboy found himself restless, sitting outside the livery with his horse tied up nearby. He couldn't shake the words the old woman had spoken, or the daughter's steady eyes that seemed to pierce through the noise of the world. He had told himself earlier that it was just a simple act of kindness, helping a woman who had fallen. But the longer he thought about it, the more he realized he had been pulled into something larger, something he did not yet understand. Inside the saloon, the laughter and music of the piano drifted out into the cool air, mingling with the clinking of glasses. But beneath that, he could hear murmurs, men talking about him. The townsfolk had not forgotten the scene in the street. Some were mocking, some suspicious, others bitter. He knew how quickly words could turn into bullets in a place like this. Folks were eager to pick sides, and anyone who crossed unwritten lines risked paying the price. Meanwhile, at the edge of town, the old Apache woman and her daughter sat quietly by their small campfire. The glow lit their faces in warm orange light, and though the daughter's expression was strong, her eyes betrayed worry. The old woman's health was failing, her cough rattling in the stillness of the night. Yet she seemed unbothered, as though she knew her time was short, and her words carried more weight because of it. She spoke of visions, of trails yet to come. And though her daughter tried to remain calm, her hands tightened on the blanket wrapped around her mother's shoulders. Back in the town, the cowboy finally rose to his feet. He told himself he was just stretching his legs. But his boots carried him toward the edge of the settlement, drawn by something he couldn't name. When he reached the glow of their fire, the daughter looked up, her expression wary but not surprised. She motioned for him to sit, and he did. Feeling the warmth of the flames push back the cool desert air, The old woman opened her eyes and spoke softly. The daughter translated with care. She says there are storms coming. Not of rain, but of men. She says the land remembers what has been done, and it calls for reckoning. The cowboy frowned, uneasy. He wasn't a man given to superstitions. He had seen hardship, yes, but he believed in the grit of work, in steel and rope, not in visions or omens. Still, there was something in the old woman's tone that made him listen. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, as though the desert itself was holding its breath, as the fire crackled. The daughter added her own words, her voice low. Many in this town see us as shadows, as things to laugh at or push aside. But my people know the land in ways they do not. My mother believes you were brought here for a reason, though neither she nor I yet know what it is. The cowboy said nothing, but his mind churned. He thought of the men in the saloon, their hard eyes and sharper tongues. He thought of the way the daughter had stood proud in the street, unflinching against their cruelty. He thought of the old woman's frailty, her cough that echoed with each passing hour. Something told him the peace of this small fire would not last. By the next morning, rumors were spreading like wildfire. Some said the cowboy had turned his back on his own kind. Others whispered he had been promised something in return for helping the old woman. A few claimed darker things, that he had made a pact, that he was being lured into Apache tricks. The sheriff, a weary man with more problems than bullets, warned the cowboy quietly. Folks here don't take kindly to crossing lines. You do well to keep your distance from them. But keeping distance was no longer simple. Every step he took seemed to tie him closer, not further, to the old woman and her daughter. That evening, when a few drunks decided to corner the daughter outside the trading post, it was the cowboy who stepped in, hand resting on the grip of his revolver. No shots were fired, but the message was clear. He was standing with them, whether he admitted it to himself or not. The tension thickened in the days that followed. The daughter's presence in town stirred unease. Some shopkeepers refused to sell her supplies. Others pretended not to see her. And always, the cowboy found himself nearby, silently ensuring no harm came her way. He told himself he was just keeping trouble at bay, but deep down he knew it was more. He could feel it every time her eyes met his, something unspoken. Something pulling them both into a storm they couldn't avoid. Meanwhile, the old woman's condition worsened. She slept more, her breath shallow, but whenever she spoke, her words carried urgency. She spoke of broken promises between settlers and her people, of blood spilled on the land, of debts unpaid. The daughter listened carefully, as if gathering pieces of a story that stretched far beyond their campfire. The cowboy listened too. Even when he told himself he shouldn't, he began to realize that what was coming wasn't just about him, or even the town. It was about something older. Rooted deep in the soil beneath their boots, the first sign of real trouble came when a rancher's cattle went missing. Whispers spread quickly, and fingers were pointed at the Apaches. Never mind that the daughter and her mother had not left the edge of towns. Suspicion was easier than truth. A small mob gathered near the saloon, voices loud and angry, calling for the sheriff to act. The cowboy stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as the daughter's name was spat with venom, her people blamed without proof. His fists clenched, his jaw tight. He knew how quickly anger could turn into violence. That night, the daughter came to him, her face lit by the pale glow of the moon. They will come soon, she said quietly. They look for a reason, and they think they have found one. Her eyes held his, unflinching. If you stay near us, you will be caught in it too. The cowboy met her gaze, the weight of choice pressing down on him once again. He could walk away, ride out before the storm broke. No one would blame him for it, no one except himself. Something in him knew that whatever lay ahead, it was tied to him now. Fate, choice, or just the stubborn pull of his own heart, he couldn't turn back. In the distance, a coyote howled, the sound echoing across the empty land. The old woman stirred in her sleep, whispering words neither of them could fully understand. The daughter leaned closer, her brow furrowed, listening. When she lifted her head again, her face was pale but determined. She says the trail is set. The fire has already been lit. The cowboy felt the truth of it deep in his bones. Trouble was coming fast, and he had placed himself in the center of it. The question now was not whether he would fight, but what it would cost when the fighting came. And as the first hint of dawn lit the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet town, he knew the storm had only just begun. The days that followed felt like walking on a knife's edge. The town was no longer a place of idle gossip and dusty routines. It had become a pot ready to boil over. The missing cattle had lit the fire, but the cowboy knew it was only an excuse. The people were restless, their fear of the Apache mixing with years of prejudice. And all of it was being fed by whispers from men who wanted blood more than truth. Every time the cowboy walked down the street, he felt eyes on his back. Men leaned against posts, spitting into the dirt, their hands resting too casually on the grips of their pistols. The daughter carried herself with the same proud strength as before, but he could see the way her eyes scanned the crowd now, sharp and cautious. The old woman grew weaker each day, her cough rattling like dry leaves in the wind, yet her words carried urgency whenever she spoke. She told her daughter that storms were not always of the sky, that men themselves could become storms. And this one was close to breaking. One evening, the cowboy overheard a heated conversation in the saloon. Through the noise of the piano and the laughter of men with too much whiskey, he caught the words, "Teach 'em a lesson and burn 'em out." His gut tightened. He pushed through the crowd, the wooden floor creaking beneath his boots, and saw 3 ranchers huddled in the corner, their voices low but their intent clear. They weren't just angry, they were planning something. Something dangerous. He didn't stay to hear more. He stepped out into the night, the desert wind cool against his face, and went straight to the edge of town where the firelight still flickered from the women's camp. The daughter looked up as he approached, her expression tense, as if she already knew what he was about to say. "They're coming," he told her simply. "Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. They'll come with fire, and they'll come with guns." She didn't flinch. Instead, she lowered her gaze, as if confirming what she had feared all along. "My mother said this would happen," she answered quietly. "She said your people carry fear like a sickness, and when it grows, it seeks someone to destroy." The cowboy crouched near the fire, staring into the flames. "It doesn't have to be this way," he muttered. But even as he said the words, he knew how hollow they sounded. He had lived long enough on the frontier to know how quickly men turn violent, how little it took to set them off. And this time, the anger had been building for too long. The old woman stirred then, her frail voice carrying more weight than her failing body. Her daughter leaned close to listen, then turned to the cowboy. "She says you cannot stop what is coming, but you can shape it. She says the trail will test you, and if you walk away, the fire will consume not just us, but you as well." The words settled heavy on him. He didn't want to believe them, but deep inside, he knew they were true. He had already stepped into this storm. Walking away now would only leave the guilt to haunt him forever. The following morning, the sheriff rode out to see him. His weathered face was tired, his eyes bloodshot from too many sleepless nights. "I've been hearing things," the sheriff said, his voice low. "They're gathering men, and I can't stop 'em. Not by myself. Folks think I've gone soft, letting those women stay here. They say if I don't act, they will." He fixed the cowboy with a hard stare. "You'd be smart to step aside. This ain't your fight." The cowboy said nothing. He simply adjusted his hat, his silence speaking louder than any argument. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then sighed and rode off, leaving behind only the sound of hooves fading into the dust. That night, the sky burned with sunset, painting the horizon in deep reds and golds. The cowboy stood watch near the camp, his rifle resting against his shoulder. The daughter sat beside her mother, her face lit by the fire's glow. For the first time, she looked less like a figure of unshakable strength and more like someone carrying the weight of 2 worlds. "You could leave," she said softly, not looking at him. "No one would stop you. You owe us nothing." The cowboy shifted his stance, the fire crackling between them. "Maybe I don't owe you," he admitted, "but I can't turn my back now. Not after what I've seen." He paused, then added, "Not after what they're planning." The daughter's eyes met his then. a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Respect, perhaps. Trust. Or maybe something more. Something neither dared to name in the shadow of the danger closing in around them. As the days passed, the tension thickened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The townsfolk became bolder, their glares sharper, their whispers louder. The cowboy caught sight of men carrying extra rifles into the saloon, of kerosene being hauled in barrels that weren't meant for lamps. Every sign pointed to the same thing. They were preparing to strike. The daughter remained calm on the surface, but her eyes betrayed her worry whenever her mother's cough grew worse. The old woman spoke less now, saving what little strength she had. Yet when she did speak, her words carried a chilling certainty. "The fire is close," she rasped one evening, "and when it burns, it will reveal what kind of man you truly are." That night, unable to sleep, the cowboy walked the darkened streets of the town. The moonlight painted everything in silver and shadow. He passed the silent church, the shuttered mercantile, the blacksmith's forge still warm from the day's work. But when he reached the saloon, he stopped cold. Through the half-open doors, he saw them, half a dozen men, gathered around a table. Their faces lit by lamplight, maps and bottles spread before them. They weren't just talking about chasing away two women. They were planning a raid, something larger, something that could spill over into bloodshed across the land. The cowboy stepped back into the shadows, his heart pounding. This was no longer about one old woman and her daughter. This was about a spark that could ignite the whole frontier, setting settler against native, neighbor against neighbor. And somehow, he had been thrust into the center of it by the time he returned to the camp. The daughter was awake, sitting by the fire with her bow laid across her lap. She looked at him, reading the truth in his eyes before he even spoke. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice low. "They mean to do more than scare you. They mean to make an example." She nodded slowly, her expression calm, but her hands tight on the bow. "Then we cannot wait for them to come. We must be ready when they do." The cowboy sat beside the fire, staring into the flames. He could feel the weight of the trail pressing down on him, each step leading closer to a choice he could no longer avoid. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. The storm had reached its breaking point. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A moment later, another answered. The sounds echoed through the night, sharp and unsettling. The cowboy's hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his side. The daughter's eyes darted toward the dark horizon, her body tense, listening. The old woman stirred then,
"Ow,"
her frail voice breaking the silence. She spoke only a few words, but the daughter's face grew pale as she translated. "She says the fire will come before dawn." The cowboy's chest tightened. His eyes scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, the shadows stretching long and deep. He could feel it now, like the charged air before a lightning strike. The storm was no longer approaching. It was already. Here, the air before dawn was thick, heavy with silence, the kind of silence that feels unnatural because it hides something worse underneath. The cowboy stood at the edge of the campfire's glow, rifle in hand, eyes searching the horizon. The old woman's warning echoed in his mind. The fire will come before dawn. He knew she wasn't speaking in riddles anymore. She was speaking plain truth. Then came the first sound. Hooves in the distance. Low at first, then clearer, sharper, carrying across the open land. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He looked toward the daughter, who was already standing tall, her bow strung, her face hard with resolve. The old woman sat quietly, her frail hands folded in her lap, but her eyes were wide open, fixed on the direction of the sound as though she had been waiting. For this exact moment, the riders came into view as the sky shifted from black to gray. A dozen men on horseback, their faces set with grim purpose. Some carried rifles, others torches. The smell of kerosene hung faintly in the breeze. They weren't coming to talk. They were coming to end something. The cowboy stepped forward, placing himself between the riders and the women. His shadow stretched long behind him in the half-light. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice steady, carrying over the open ground. The men slowed but didn't stop. One of them, a tall rancher with a scar down his cheek, rode a few paces ahead. "Step aside, cowboy," he barked. "This ain't your fight. We've come to deal with what should have been dealt with long ago." The cowboy didn't move. His hands rested firm on his rifle, though he hadn't raised it. "You're wrong," he said. "This is my fight. Because what you're about to do has nothing to do with justice. It's hate and nothing more." The words rippled through the riders, some muttering, others gripping their guns tighter. The scarred rancher spat into the dirt. "You'd stand against your own people for them? After everything they've done?" The cowboy's silence was answer enough. He didn't need to explain. The truth was written in his stance, in the way his boots dug firm into the ground. He had made his choice long before this moment ever came. Tension cracked in the air like thunder. The daughter raised her bow, eyes sharp as flint, the arrow drawn back, but held steady. The riders shifted uneasily in their saddles, some glancing at one another, doubt flickering in their eyes. They had come expecting fear, submission, maybe even silence. What they saw instead was defiance. The old woman began to speak then. Her voice frail, but carried by something stronger than lungs or flesh. Her words were not understood by the riders, but they cut through the dawn air with a power that silenced even the bravest. The daughter translated, her voice trembling only slightly. "She says the land remembers. She says every drop of blood spilled here leaves a mark. Oh, and those who carry hate will be crushed beneath it." The rancher sneered, though his grip on the reins tightened. "Enough of this foolishness. Get out of the way, cowboy, or you'll go down with them." The cowboy's rifle rose slowly, steady in his hands. His voice was low, but every word was clear. "If you fire that torch, you'll have to go through me first." For a moment, everything froze. The riders stared at him, the torches flickering in their hands. The dawn light crept higher, painting the land in pale gold. The daughter stood poised, the old woman silent now, her eyes unblinking. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then came the crack. A rifle fired, echoing across the desert like a clap of thunder. The cowboy dropped to one knee, the dirt exploding beside him. The daughter loosed her arrow, striking the torch from a man's hand. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, men shouted, the sound of gunfire filling the morning air. The battle had begun. The cowboy fired back, each shot deliberate, each movement steady. He wasn't shooting for pride or vengeance, he was shooting to protect. The daughter moved with precision, her arrows flying swift, her face set with fierce determination. The old woman sat still, her voice rising in chants that seemed to cut through the noise, steadying those who listened, unsettling those who came with hate in their hearts. The fight stretched on. The air thick with smoke, the ground trembling beneath the hooves of panicked horses. The cowboy's shoulder burned where a bullet had grazed him, but he pressed on, refusing to fall. The daughter fought beside him, never faltering, her courage shining brighter than the flames that licked at the torches scattered on the ground, one by one. The riders faltered. Some fled into the desert, their will broken. Others lay silent in the dust, their guns fallen from their hands. The scarred rancher remained, his face twisted with rage, his rifle raised. He aimed at the daughter, his finger tightening on the trigger. The cowboy saw it. He moved without thinking, throwing himself between them. The rifle roared, and pain tore through his side. He fell to one knee, but his hands did not fail him. His own rifle fired a heartbeat later, the scarred rancher thrown back from his saddle, crashing into the dirt. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of horses and men. The last of the riders fled, leaving behind nothing but dust, smoke, and the faint smell of gunpowder. The fight was over, but the ground was marked with what it had cost. The cowboy staggered, blood soaking his shirt, but he stayed on his feet. The daughter was at his side in an instant, her hands steady, her eyes filled with something she didn't speak aloud. The old woman's voice rose again, weak but sure. "The fire has passed," she whispered. Her daughter translated, tears in her eyes. "She says the trail is clear now. She says you did not walk away." The cowboy lowered his head, exhaustion pressing down on him, but inside, something shifted. He had stood when others turned their backs. He had chosen compassion over fear, honor over hate. In the days that followed, the town was changed. The riders who had fled did not return, their shame too heavy. The sheriff, though weary, stood firmer, his silence replaced with action. Some townsfolk, once filled with suspicion, now looked at the cowboy with respect. Their voices quieter, their judgments softened by what they had seen. The old woman's health faded soon after. She passed quietly beneath the stars, her daughter at her side, her hand resting gently in the cowboy's. Her final words were of peace, of trails that stretched beyond the horizon, of hope that one day the land would no longer be scarred by hate. The daughter grieved, but she did not break. She stood tall, her spirit as unshaken as it had been that day in the street when she first faced the town. The cowboy remained beside her, not because he had been asked, but because he could not imagine walking away. The story of that dawn spread across the frontier. Some told it as the tale of a foolish cowboy who risked everything for two strangers. Others spoke of it as a warning, a reminder that hate had no victory. But those who had seen it with their own eyes told it differently. They spoke of a cowboy who stood for what was right, of an old Apache woman whose wisdom outlived her body, and of a daughter who carried her people's strength like fire in her heart. The cowboy never sought recognition. He rode the same trails, wore the same dust-stained hat, spoke with the same quiet voice, but something in him had changed. He had found more than a fight that day. He had found a reason to stand, a bond that reached beyond blood or name, and a truth that could not be erased by whispers or guns. As the sun set one evening, painting the land in gold and crimson, the cowboy looked to the horizon. The daughter stood beside him, her gaze steady, her voice soft. "The land remembers," she said. He nodded, knowing now what those words meant, and with the wind carrying the scent of sage and dust, the two of them stood together, not as strangers divided by fear, but as souls bound by the choices that had shaped them. The trail behind them was marked with fire, but the road ahead stretched wide open and waiting.